See those very shortly. Hello. My name's Chris Perks, and I'm going to take you through this Jobs to be Done session today. So we'll be with each other for the next 45 to 60 minutes. I hope you're all well. Okay, so whilst a few of you still enter the room, just want to give you a few housekeeping bits and make sure you get the very best out of your experience with us today. So hopefully you'll be familiar with the Zoom platform. I can't hear you and I can't see you. You should be able to see and hear me accurately. If you can see me and hear me, if you just want to pop a message in that little chat box, you can find the chat is the speech bubble icon that you should see on the slide. If you don't see that, under the More tab where you see those three little white circles, it should be under there. And I will pop a message into the box and say hi to you all. Hi all. There we go. Now, right above where you type, there's a little box that says all to, and then all panelists, and then there's a drop down. In that drop down, it says all panelists and attendees. If you could just quickly change that to all panelists and attendees and drop me a little message back saying hi or hello or whatever you want. George, we've got you. Excellent stuff. Gaurav, we've got you too. Excellent. So you can all see me and you can all hear me, which is very, very cool. Crusto, Mia, Stefanos, Paul, Jose, brilliant. Well, we are a truly global cohort, which is fantastic. So whatever time of day it is, hello and welcome, and hopefully you'll enjoy this session that we're about to undertake. Couple of things. If you're lucky enough to be doing this session from home, you may have other people in the house that are streaming things on Netflix or online gaming or playing Fortnite or whatever it is they're doing. If you're having connectivity issues, just ask them to close down those applications and stop using the internet for a little while. If you've got any background applications running, things like Google Drive, Dropbox, Spotify, that sort of stuff, close those on down. Even your mail apps can be quite resource heavy, so if you close those down, that'd be great. And last but not least, if you can use a wired connection, so a LAN cable into your machine, please do that. Most webinar platforms tend to play a little bit more nicely with wired connections than they do wireless ones. So with that being said, there's some information on the screen in front of you around technical considerations for this class, but it will be all relatively straightforward. If you've got a question, you please use the Q&A box, and I'll pick up as many of those questions as we go through. And when I ask you a question and we're having a bit of a conversation around some of the points that we'll be discussing today, which we will do in the very next slide, I believe, then use the chat box and I'll get your insights and you participate and I'll be able to answer you directly there. Either way, if you want to ask me a question, use the Q&A box ideally. But I should be able to pick them all up. If I don't answer straight away and you think I've ignored you or missed your question, please feel free to post your question again. I try and answer every single question in these sessions, so I should be okay. But sometimes I do miss the odd one or two, especially if you guys are really participating well and there's loads of comments coming in. So let's just jump on through now to the main element of this session today. We're going to be focusing on a jobs to be done framework. So as a quick starter for 10, can you let me know in the chat box, which you should see somewhere on your screen by now, let me know in the chat box, are you familiar with the jobs to be done framework? You can either put yes or no. Let me have a look and see where we're going with this. So quite a few no's I can see already. George, Andrew, Stefanos, Raghav, Paul. Okay, great. So it looks, I'm not sure. So we've got a couple of not sures. We've got a couple of maybes. I'm going to walk you through this framework. Now, it's one of those frameworks. It's one of the principles that you see and you think, well, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But until it's laid out in a certain format, it becomes very difficult to really embrace the principles of this framework and make meaningful change in your day-to-day or your strategic thinking. So, Xavier, you're familiar with it, which is awesome. I might rely on you for some insights. So it's essentially, it's a framework that allows us to drive strategy by identifying what the customer wants to achieve and what job they want to get done. I'm going to talk a lot about milkshakes for the first 15 minutes of this session and what they taught us about strategy and innovation. I'll then move on to another section which kind of contradicts conventional wisdom when we think about our customers, our products, our competition, our user claims, our segments. And I'll address specifically why they aren't always the best answer for you. I'll talk about how we establish performance criteria and how we write a jobs to be done statement, truly putting ourselves in our customers' shoes and seeing the world as they see it. All right, so that's what we're going to be aiming for today. So first proper question for you guys. Why do people buy from you? There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to know, why is it that people buy from you? Why do they engage with your business? Why do they engage with your professional services or your e-com store or your app? Why do they buy from you? Why do they interact with you? Let me know in that chat box. Trust and reputation, price and service, quality and reputation. Because they need something, Stephanus, that's really close. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answers. I just want to try and get a sense of why you think it is they buy from you. So I'm just moving some of these modules around, so 1 second. IT expertise, so you are absolutely the experts in your category, price and loyalty, to satisfy a need or solve a problem. Peter, yeah, that's really close. You make it very easy for them to do business with you. You've got a wicked value proposition, as Eve was saying. Expertise and experience from Paul. Help them simplify their lives. Okay, right. And influencer followers. Okay, right. So you can influence an audience, and that's why they tend to do business with you. Okay, look, all of those are absolutely brilliant answers. I think the one that came closest to my definition for the purposes of this session was Peter with his to satisfy a need or solve a problem. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. All of the other things that you mentioned are absolutely correct. That is probably why people do business with you regularly. It's why people come to you, that's fine. But people buy products or services that help them get a job done. Now, you may be able to help them get that job done better or quicker or cheaper or with a more longer lasting solution or a more convenient solution. But essentially, people buy products and services to help them get a job done. And that's what we're going to focus on today. The job it is they want to get done. And by focusing on that very small nuance, it can unlock a lot of additional innovation, insights, and strategic thinking that we weren't necessarily thinking of before. So let me give you a couple of examples about the difference between jobs to be done thinking and conventional thinking. So conventionally, we tend to think about our customers by attributes such as age or race or marital status or demographics or loads of other categories, disposable income and so on. Whereas with jobs to be done thinking, we focus on the problem the customer would like to solve, irrespective of all of those other factors. I'm not saying that we don't look at those or consider those. I'm just saying we put the customer first and focus on the problems they would like to solve. Okay. Again, with conventional thinking, we tend to focus on what the companies want to sell rather than what the customer actually needs. Now, that might sound really stupid to a lot of you, and you might be thinking, of course not. But with jobs to be done thinking, we focus on understanding the job for which consumers find themselves hiring or buying a product or service. Now, let me explain that a little bit more. This is where we really get into the weeds with this subject matter. The conventional thinking about companies focusing on what they want to sell rather than what the customers actually need. We've got loads of experience of that, I'm sure. Maybe you will have seen it in your own organizations. Now, you don't have to answer this in the chat box. I'm not asking for you to shout it out in that chat box, but think about it to yourself. Think about, have you ever gone so far down a path with a product or a service or a proposition or a presentation or product development or any of those things where you've kind of lost sight of what the customer actually wanted in the first place, and you've become so obsessed with whether you can build this particular feature or whether you can offer this particular product to your audience, and you didn't really stop to think about whether that's truly what that customer needed or wanted. And I suppose if we look deep inside and we cast our minds way back, I'm sure we can all think of examples when we've done that very thing and we've got so obsessed with actually doing it that we stopped really to think about whether our consumers really wanted it or not. All right. Now, I've found myself in that situation many times, and hopefully the framework that I give you today will help that never happen again for you guys and keep your customer front and center of your mind. Okay, so let me explain a little bit more. Your customers don't actually buy what it is you offer. That's not what they're buying. That's physically what they purchase. That's physically what they transact for, but they're not buying the object. They're buying a solution to their problem. So, for example, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill bit. Yes, they transact that specific product. What they actually want is a 1/4-inch hole, right? People don't want a TV, they want entertainment. They don't want scales, they want weight management, and so on. I'm not going to read all of those out. You can see them there on the screen in front of you. And just so you're aware, you don't have to worry about writing all of this down. You will get a copy of this presentation. I'm going to send this on to support after the session, and they will circulate that to you. So you get the complete copy of what you're seeing today. So take notes on the important things to kind of embed it in your mind and stuff for you to refer back to, but you will get the entire presentation after this session anyway. I've noticed it's gone a little dark in here, so I'm just going to turn on those lights. There we go. So let me take you back, right? And why is this important? Well, if people don't want a 1/4-inch drill bit, they want a 1/4-inch hole. That can frame dramatically how we talk about our 1/4-inch drill bits. Instead of talking about them being manufactured from the finest materials and how they're diamond cut and all this other stuff that's very important to us as the product owner, if we were to concentrate on talking about how easily that customer could get their 1/4-inch hole, it resonates with them so much more. It increases relevance and it increases the attractiveness of our proposition when we frame it in terms of what's important to them. It's not just the product that we offer, it's the context in which we offer it that becomes so very, very important. And if we truly understand what it is they want, it helps us be much more competitive. It helps us outflank our competition, and it helps us increase the amount of relevance we have with our audience. So for this session, I want you to not think about your market as it being defined by the products that you sell or the demographics of your audience that buy your products. I want you to think about this session, and I want you to think about your market being defined by the job it wants to get done. What is the job your customers are trying to achieve? Now, I'm going to give you loads of examples of how to bring this to life for you, because whilst the 1/4-inch drill bit versus the 1/4-inch the 1/4-inch hole argument is valid, and I'm sure you can all understand that, sometimes it's difficult to put that into a meaningful context in your business. And I'm going to give you a framework and a statement that you can write to make that happen really quickly and easily in a second. But what I really want to do, first of all, is for you to fully understand and create that understanding of this framework. So I'm going to give you the example from the fast food chain. So a fast food chain wanted to improve the sales of their milkshakes. Why did they want to do that? Well, it's a very high margin product. They serve a lot of people. It's one of the underutilized products on the menu. The more people they can get buying those products, the better it is for the business. So what they did is they focused on the product first of all, thinking quite naturally, okay, if we make our product better, more people will buy it. Sounds fairly logical, right? So what the fast food chain did is they added more flavors, they added more toppings, they made it creamier than other fast food chains' milkshakes. But it didn't really shift the needle in terms of sales results. So the next thing they did was focus on their consumers. Now, you could arguably say they should have focused on their consumers before they started looking at product, but we'll give them a pass on this occasion. So they then decided to focus on the consumer. So what they did is they paneled and surveyed a whole bunch of consumers, and they asked them directly about how they could improve their milkshakes. They had a proper consumer panel put together, and they solicited feedback from this big group of customers. And they used that feedback to make further changes to the product. Again, no significant results in terms of improving sales. So they've already looked at the product itself and made some changes there. They've looked at the consumers and taken their feedback without any significant changes. And I'll tell you exactly why those two things didn't make an impact a little bit later on today. So the next thing they did is thought, right, okay, let's have a look at our more closely defined segments. So they profiled their target consumers into market segments and created milkshakes according to those segments. So they think, actually, if we be a lot more, if we're a lot more detailed and a lot more relevant to specific segments, that should help improve things. But again, still no results. So they focused on product, they focused on consumers generally and used their feedback. They've created product offerings for specific customer segments and still absolutely nothing to shift the needle in terms of sales. So they then asked a research team to try and understand why people were buying their milkshakes. And it's that why that's really, really important and helps unlock that job to be done. So the first thing they do, and this is really important, and I'm going to come back to this once or twice more in this session, they first concentrated on observing. So they observed a lot of customers who bought milkshakes. And they observed that actually a lot of customers are buying milkshakes in the morning, and many of them would only buy a milkshake. So they'd only come into the restaurant and just buy a milkshake. They wouldn't buy a milkshake with X, Y, and Z other products. And several of the people who bought these milkshakes were wearing business attire. Now, the reason why the observation is so critical here is because you could argue the time that milkshakes are bought and the number of items that are bought alongside a milkshake should be easily identifiable by having a look at your sales data. And yeah, that's true. You know, you could run off a report when a milkshake sold, what a milkshake sold alongside with, and you should be able to do some sort of big data piece to understand that a little bit more. But what you wouldn't really understand is the context of that. So if you see people coming into the restaurant in business attire, that could potentially lead you down another path that you wouldn't see if you were just analyzing sales data. So the next step, first step was observe. The next step is to interview them. So they asked the research team to speak and interview those consumers who were buying milkshake first thing in the morning. And they asked them why they bought the milkshake and what they were doing at the time and what went through their head when they bought that milkshake. And really trying to understand the why. And what they found out is that people bought milkshakes in the morning to make their commute less boring. That was the underlying job they were trying to get done when they bought the milkshake. They wanted to make their commute less boring. Customers didn't really care too much about the taste. Of course, it has to taste relatively nice, but it wasn't really a major consideration at this point. They needed something that they can consume immediately, i.e. they don't have to prepare it or heat it up or anything like that. It needs to be something that they could eat or consume with one hand. So they can keep one hand on the wheel and one hand on the shaker. Something that doesn't easily stain or flake or crumb, of course, unless you spill it all over you. But something that doesn't easily stain. And a milkshake did that job better than its competition. Now, its competition weren't other competitors' milkshakes, right? That wasn't the competitive set in this instance. The competitive set is, what else are you going to snack on in your long commute to work? Right? You're going to eat donuts, or you're going to have some fruit, or you're going to have a bagel or candy bar, chocolate, or an energy bar, or protein bars, or whatever it is. Actually, the milkshake did that job better than any of those. It didn't make a mess, and it lasted 15 or 20 minutes. A milkshake isn't something you can just drink in one swig, right? A big, thick, creamy milkshake, it kind of sits heavy in your stomach and makes you feel full up, and it takes 15 or 20 minutes of that commute away while you're keeping your hands busy while you're at the wheel. And the milkshake did that better than all of the competition. And the competition, once again, is things like donuts and bagels and energy bars and so on. Because those are relatively quick to eat, they stain or they crumb or they flake and it can get a bit messy. Not so with the milkshake. Now, what this allowed for was out-of-the-box strategic direction and strategic thinking. So it enabled the fast food chain to install easy, fast-pay digital payment kiosks, right? So if they're on their commute, they want to make it nice and frictionless for them, make it nice and easy. It allowed them to improve their targeting capability of their display ads. And it allowed them to run mobile campaigns that targeted commuters specifically. And it also changed the messaging, the approach that they went to market with. So rather than saying or having an overall value proposition of milkshakes for enjoy our new, thicker, creamier milkshake, which, okay, fine, not bad. But it allowed it to be much more specific. Make your commute less boring with our thick, creamy milkshakes. So much more relevant. So when you're advertising to commuters about making their commute less boring with this, you're capturing a whole new market that wouldn't have previously considered a milkshake, but now they do because they think, oh, actually, yeah, that'd be pretty good, 15, 20 minutes, makes my commute less boring, a much more relevant message to their audience. So does anybody have any questions about the milkshake story before we come on to the factors that kind of challenge our conventional thinking in a little bit more detail or in more ways? If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or to put them in the chat box. Either way, I want to try and make sure that you guys get as much value out of this session as you physically can. Okay, so why adding features doesn't always work. So we always think, well, actually, if we add more features to our product, it becomes more valuable in the consumer's eyes and they'll value us so much more. Well, adding features doesn't always mean adding value, and that's something that we really need to be aware of. So a feature is not necessarily used in a vacuum, right? It has to help the user achieve that real life situational goal. And what I mean by adding value, adding features doesn't always add value. Remember on the previous slides where I said observation is really, really important? Until we've truly observed what our user does and understand why they do it, we can't really speak about what features they would truly value. All right. So let me give you an example of this, and I'll give you a couple of more along the way. So doineedanumbrella.com is a relatively straightforward website in the US. You put your zip or postcode into the little box, and it tells you one thing. It tells you yeah or no. You don't need an umbrella. Yes, you do need an umbrella. That's it. So it isn't packed full of loads of other features, you know, wind reports and surf reports or anything like that. It is literally just, do I need an umbrella or not? A fairly niche example, and I'm sure most of you would agree that actually that's a little bit too niche. Well, how about Google? I'm sure we've all used Google at some point, or we're at least familiar with Google as a platform, and have a look at how simple their interface is. They don't chock it full of news feeds and social updates and tickers and all that sort of stuff. It's just Google, the logo, a box, and 2 buttons. That's it. Now, I don't know if many of you remember using some of the older web browsers and search engines, so things like Yahoo and MSN back in the day. I don't know if they still do. I haven't used any of those for years. But they used to have all these widget areas on that homepage of that search engine, thinking that they would be adding much more value to their users, and it would be a kind of central hub where people would gather to get all of their news or their stock prices, their weather feeds, their sports updates, their social updates, and so on. Well, of course, that's not simply true. People go to the search engines because they want a specific amount of information. So if they're searching for something, they want to get access to that information quickly. And Google understood that beyond all others. An example where this isn't true, right? An example where this has gone wrong in the past. Do you remember Evernote, the note-taking application that would allow you to store notes and images and all that sort of stuff on your mobile and your desktop and your laptop and all these other places? Real ubiquitous note-taking platform. Over the years, hugely successful business. And as the years went by and the user base continued to grow, they started adding more and more features until the tool itself was a bit bloated. It was quite clunky. And they had to look at how many people were actually using all of these other features. And it turned out less than 3 or 4% of them were using the additional features. The vast majority of people were using the core note-taking feature set. Now, what that meant was they'd spent years and months investing valuable time, energy, resource, money into developing, not only developing features that the user didn't want, but neglecting the features that users did want because they didn't really understand what it is their consumers were coming to them for, which goes to illustrate the point, adding additional features doesn't always mean adding additional value. I think it was Einstein that said, perfection is achieved when there's nothing left to take away, not when there's nothing left to add. And I think broadly speaking, that is a relatively good philosophy to have. Okay, so next up, why focusing on the product doesn't always work. So we focused on our features, but what about the product itself? So being better than the direct competitors doesn't always mean being good or relevant. The goal of the user defines the competition. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples here. In fact, I'm going to ask for some participation from you guys. So, Odeon Cinema Chain, they're a big movie theatre chain here in the UK and Europe. And they have these big kind of multi-screen cinema venues. Who do you think they're in competition with? Okay, so 2 parts to this. You can let me know in the chat box who you think they're in competition with. Before this session, you probably will have said competing movie chain or movie chain theatres or movie theatre chains, right? That's probably what you would have said. Now, knowing the information that I've given you now and the fact that the goal of the user defines the competition, who do you think movie theatre chains like Odeon are competing with? Yeah, absolutely, they're competing with Netflix and Amazon. They're competing with online streaming services. Hulu, yes. Netflix and Amazon, yes. They're competing with Angry Birds. They're competing with the other entertainment that's available. They're competing with the bowling alleys. They're competing with the restaurants. They're competing with the entertainment category. Remember, you've got movie buffs who want to go to a specific movie, or they go to the movies all the time. And yes, you've got that core audience that are only interested in the movies. Absolutely you are. Absolutely you have. But that's a relatively small portion of their overall market. The vast majority of moviegoers are casual moviegoers because they want entertainment. And if you only concentrate on being better than the other movie theaters, then you're missing out a huge slice of that market that you could be better than the rest of those entertainment venues. And that's one of the reasons why, certainly here in the UK and in Europe, we're starting to see more and more movie theatres become multi-entertainment venues. What do I mean by that? They're sticking in Costa coffees, they're sticking in restaurants, they're sticking in bars, they're sticking in soft play areas for the kids, they're sticking in expanded game arcade centres and rooms. They're becoming e-games and e-sports venues where you can compete and have the e-sports competitions. They're taking more of that prime real estate that they've traditionally kept for moviegoers and adding in more entertainment type venues, because they finally started to understand, actually, we're not competing with other movie theaters as much as we are competing with the entertainment sector at large. So if you as a movie theater can use some of that real estate to provide good food options, to provide casual dining options, a bar, drinks, coffee, e-games, e-sports, arcades, soft play, and a whole raft of others, you stand a far more larger chance of becoming successful in your marketplace, because you're not just competing against the movie chains. So ask yourself this, in relation to that last point, who are you really competing against? Did Audi, Mercedes, and BMW ever think that they could be competing against anybody else 10 or 15 years ago other than each other? Now they're competing with the likes of Tesla. They're potentially competing with Apple and Google as they all enter that autonomous vehicle movement, or that electric car. Uber, absolutely. Are we reaching a point where car ownership is less attractive for a bigger portion of the market because rentalship is so much easier, cheaper, and more accessible? Quite possibly. Right? But 10 or 15 years ago, if you'd have asked Audi and Mercedes and BMW who their competitors were, they would have said each other. That's it. That's where that list would have ended. Not now. Yeah, Zipcar is another really great example from Stefanos. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Zipcar, but it was one of the initial rent a car using just your app and unlock it with your phone and pick it up and drop it off wherever you want. It's a really, really wicked service. But with the likes of digitization and globalization, it's increased the amount of competition, of course, and the competition, as we know, can come from anywhere, can come from any angle. And that's what we need to understand here. Okay, so why focusing on user claims doesn't always work. Now, this is probably one of my favorite topics to discuss, and it's also the one that can unlock the biggest amount of value in my experience. So people think in terms of existing solutions, always, not in terms of the goals they want to try and achieve. So there's a number of reasons why focusing on what the user says they want isn't always, not always, the thing that you should be focusing on. It's why observation is so important, and I'll come back to that observation point again in a second. So in terms of the existing solutions, it's not up to the general public to think about what it is they want or how they want it to be, because they're not creative. They're not born in, they don't own this industry. They're not vested in this. They have a passive desire to improve something. And Henry Ford identified this point by saying he's quite famously quoted, amongst other things, as having said, if I'd have asked my customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. And that's so true, because the alternative to the automobile at the time was a horse, of course. So when you ask the user what they want to make their travel and commuting more efficient, they would have said, well, a faster horse, or a cheaper horse to keep, or a horse that eats less, or a horse that takes up less space, or a horse that's more comfortable to ride, a horse that's better behaved. Those are the things that they would think about at the time. And Henry Ford realized that. So if you've got a new product or a new service to market that relies on early adopters, you need to think about how you can get them to realize there's a new, better way of doing something. They don't have to stick to those existing solutions. I'll give you another example of why focusing on those user claims doesn't always work. Now, this one is applicable to everybody, whether you're entering the market as a brand new product or service and it's something quite innovative and relies on early adopters, like the previous example, or whether you're in a well-defined business and a well-defined sector. This one applies equally. And there's a couple of examples I've got for this one for you. So There's two reasons. What users say they want is their state. We refer to that as stated preference. What they say they want, the stated preference, is often not what they actually choose, which is their revealed preference. Now, if you're doing customer surveys, one of the reasons why I think customer surveys in isolation are not useless, but should be treated with a very high degree of skepticism, because a stated preference and a revealed preference can very often be very different. And let me give you a couple of examples of that. On the screen, you should see a picture of an airplane from Ryanair. Ryanair, a budget, low-cost airline in Europe. And they simply do what it says on the tin. You know, we'll get you from A to B and we'll probably charge you less than anybody else. And if I'm looking for a flight to from the UK to Ireland or the UK to Spain or wherever, typically a Ryanair flight's going to cost me about €50 or €100 or something like that. If I'm using one of the non-budget airlines or one of the more expensive airlines, that could be €400, right? So they offer cheap air travel, and they haven't always considered their customers or taken on customer feedback as seriously as they should. And they've got a very terrible, or they have had reputational problems in the past on social media, people moaning about them and that sort of thing. But up until very recently, Ryanair have been one of the most profitable airlines in the last 10 years. And they are only profitable because so many people fly with them. And in fact, if you look at the numbers of people that fly with them year on year, there is exponential growth every single year. More and more people fly with Ryanair. Yet when you speak to anybody about booking a flight to a neighboring country, everybody always says, oh, I'd never book with Ryanair. Oh, I'd never fly with Ryanair. Oh, Ryanair is terrible. So their stated preference definitely isn't Ryanair. But when you actually look at the flight numbers, their revealed preference very much is Ryanair. You know, more and more people fly with them. So we have a big disconnect between the stated preference and the revealed preference. And that's why observation is so, so important. And again, I'll come on to that observation piece in a second. So again, another example of this. We love social media, but we pretend to hate it, right? So a Wall Street Journal and an NBC News poll reported that Americans hate social media. So according to what people tell researchers, Americans overwhelmingly believe that social media, it divides us, it wastes our time, it spreads lies and falsehoods, and it trades in unfair attacks and rumors. But of course, their behavior says a whole different thing altogether. Over 70% of Americans say they access social media at least once a day, right? And you can see the results of that study right here, that poll right here. More people believe it divides us than brings us together. More people believe it wastes our time rather than uses it well. More people think it spreads lies and falsehoods than spreads news and information. And way more people think it spreads unfair attacks and rumors rather than holding public figures and corporations accountable. Yet we still continue to use it all the time, which goes to illustrate the point I was trying to make earlier. If you want the truth, forget what people say and look at what it is they do. Observation. There's a number of ways you can do this. If you're in a retail store, you can hire retail store specialists to come in and physically observe what your consumers do and the challenges they have and how they move around the store, what they interact with and so on. If you're online, you can use things like Hotjar or video analytics, where you install the tracking code on your website and you get the actual video clips of the user moving the mouse around and what buttons they click on and where they get stuck and what things they don't like. You physically get to observe that rather than asking them. Now, we still need to do that interview piece, but we need the observation as well to make sure that what we get in the interview absolutely rings true. Observation is key. Another example, so another survey, Americans have almost no trust in tech companies to protect their personal and private information. And in none of these cases do more than 20% of people surveyed have any level of trust in these institutions whatsoever. And yet every day we knowingly and unknowingly hand huge volumes of information to them. So again, there's a big disconnect between what people say and what people do. I think I've made that point really clear now, but it's one that can very often unlock real insights in your business. Don't take what they say as being true in the first instance. Observe them first, and then make that judgment. Okay, cool. And I think the person who sums that up better than anybody else is David Ogilvy, often considered to be the modern father of marketing. Consumers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And I think if we bear that in mind to at least some degree, we'd have a healthy level of skepticism and question that little bit deeper than what we would do otherwise. Okay, so again, if you've got any questions, you guys are really, really quiet. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A section. or to even post them in the chat. The chat's relatively quiet. So wherever you want to ask me a question or how this can apply to you, feel free to let me know in the chat. Okay, so what have we looked at? We looked at customers, we've looked at product, we've looked at features, we've looked at user claims. So let's have a look at the segments now. So why focusing on segments doesn't always work. And each one of these is directly related to the milkshake example that I gave you earlier, of course. So the fact that you're 18 to 35 years old with a college degree doesn't cause you to buy a product. There might be some sort of correlation, but it doesn't cause it. So we're talking here about the difference between causation and correlation, okay? Now, sometimes when we break things into segments, we get that confused and we make the wrong assumptions. Typically, as brands, what we would tend to do is create things like this, a user profile or a persona or an avatar, or a whole bunch of other things that we tend to call them. And what this helps us do is get into the hearts and minds of who our customer is and what motivates them and what they're interested in and what they like to do with their spare time and how they interact with media and technology and so on. And these can be very useful. I'm not saying that we wouldn't do these at all. But I think we need to bear in mind, actually, that just because they fit that particular demographic or that particular profile doesn't necessarily mean why they would buy a product or a service, because you're always the same person. So let me give you an example. I'm 39 years old, I'm married, I've got 2 sons, I work in professional services, and I have a relatively good disposable income, right? That would be my profile, if you like. Now, because of my profile, that doesn't cause me to buy my kids takeout food after a day at the beach. We just want something quick and easy we can consume in the car on the way home. The kids are tired. We just want some peace and quiet. We want to get the kids fed. We want to get home. I'm still that same 39-year-old married, 2 kids, relatively high disposable income, and works in professional services. Right? Equally, that same profile doesn't mean that I would book an expensive, romantic, quiet restaurant where there's only adults, where myself and my wife can have a nice romantic evening together. I'm still that same profile. And if you target me based on my profile, you're missing the real point. I'm one, I could shop in either of those places, plus everything in between. But if you speak in a way that's relevant to me at the right time with the right message, you're going to get far more cut through with me as a consumer and all your other consumers. Because what I am and what profile I fit doesn't cause me to buy products. What causes me to buy products and services, as you will remember from the second or third slide, is I want a solution to my problem, right? We're all tired, we're exhausted, we want to get home and get to bed. We just want a quick and easy meal so we can get on our way. That's what caused me to buy fast food. I've been traveling for a while. I haven't been at home a lot. I want a nice romantic evening with my wife where we can talk and discuss things without the disruption of the kids or TV or anything like that. That's what caused me to buy or book a table at the expensive romantic quiet restaurant. Right? My profile doesn't cause me to buy those products. My profile doesn't cause me to do that. There might be correlation with it. And I need you to consider that when you're working with your consumer profiles. Okay, so next up. So we understand what all this is now. Right? We understand that actually we only really engage with products or services if they help us solve a problem or help us get a job done. Okay, so somebody's asking, I haven't got your name, unfortunately. I agree, but no point targeting a profile that can't afford it, surely. I absolutely agree with you. And again, apologies, I don't know your name. It just comes up as user here for you, unfortunately. So user, let me tell you, I absolutely agree. And I'm not saying that we discount our profiles and our targeting altogether. Absolutely not. Furthest thing from it. Because you're right. If you operate in a very highly affluent market that requires your end user to be highly affluent and have a certain amount of disposable income, it's absolutely pointless you targeting 18 to 24-year-olds that don't have that requirement that the 45 to 55-year-olds have or the income for it. I absolutely agree with you. But what we should be doing when we're targeting those 45 to 50-year-olds with high disposable incomes and high net worth, what we should be doing is we should be using messaging that's super relevant to them based on the job it is they want to get done, not based on the features of our particular product or service. That's all I'm referring to there. There's not a causation. There's definitely a correlation between those older people who are more wealthy that buy your product or service, but it doesn't cause them to buy your service, is my point. Okay, so how do we understand this and how do we put ourselves... Lloyd, got you. Apologies for calling you user. There we go. Okay, right. So How do we go about categorizing these jobs to be done, or even understanding them so we can get that messaging and that strategic approach correct for our customers? Well, we have two things to consider. We have a functional criteria to consider. That's the objective. That's what they want to get done, right? But we also have a softer, more emotional criteria that we need to consider as well, which is much more subjective, okay? And that emotional criteria can be broken down into two aspects. One can be personal and how they feel about that situation, and the other one can be much more social and how they believe they're being perceived by others when using that solution. And we need to consider both of those if we're going to make sure that we're considering every element here. So let me give you an example for the iPod, right? Go back to 2000 and whatever, 8, 6, I don't know, whenever the iPod came out. Go back to the iPod and think about the functional criteria. The functional criteria was, when I travel, I want to take music with me. Simple as that, right? And in fact, Apple's value proposition, I don't know if any of you can remember it when the iPod was launched, but their strapline and their value proposition was 1,000 songs in your pocket. Perfect, right? Probably the best one there's ever been. So functional criteria is, I want to take music with me when I travel. The emotional criteria is a really interesting one here, because on the personal side of that is, how do you feel about that situation? Well, music can make you feel quite emotive, can't it? If you're running, for example, then you want something that's upbeat and high tempo to keep you motivated. If you're feeling a little bit melancholy, you want something that's a little bit softer. If you're having a romantic evening away, you maybe want some softer, more romantic music, or whatever it is. Socially, how are you perceived by others while using that solution? Well, I don't know if you remember, but when the iPod launched, it was the first one to have the white headphone cables that we just take for granted now. They're everywhere. But you knew if somebody had white headphones in, you knew they'd got one of those new fancy iPods. And in fact, I live here in the UK, and in a number of the major cities in the UK, there was a spike in robberies, in the street robberies, because people were having their iPods stolen from them in the street, and it was easy to tell whether you got an iPod or not because you've got the white headphones, right? So how do you want to be perceived by others using the solution? Well, if you were one of the first people to buy an iPod, you would absolutely be seen as being, oh, they're a trendsetter, they're ahead of the curve, you've got one of those new fancy iPods. There was that kind of, mystique about it at the time, and that the aspiration about it at the time. So those things need to be considered. First of all, personally, how is the user going to feel about buying your solution or buying your product? And second of all, how are they going to be perceived when they deal with you? Are they going to be perceived positively or not? If they are, absolutely, you need to talk about that and make them aware of that so they can feel better about making that decision to deal with you and your business. Okay, so how do we formulate these jobs to be done statements? Well, this is dead simple. There's only 3 things that you really need to consider with this. There's a situation, there's a motivation, and there's an expected outcome. Remember those 3 things: situation, motivation, expected outcome. So when you do something, you want to achieve something so that you can feel a certain way, or you can be a certain way, or you can benefit a certain way. And that's it. I'm going to give you some examples of these now. So situation, motivation, expected outcome. Okay. So, I'll ignore that title there, that shouldn't be there, sorry, that's my mistake. So, when I travel, so situation, I want to take a large selection of music, motivation, so I can be entertained, expected outcome. You see that? The 3 blocks. When I travel, that's the motivation. I want to take a large selection of music, that's the, when I travel is the situation. I want to take a large selection of music is the situation, and the expected outcome is so I can be entertained. So that's the one for the iPod. Done. Nailed. When I do my taxes, I want to reduce the time it takes so I can get back to work. Now, that could be for something like QuickBooks, right? An online accountancy software package that makes doing your books easier and quicker and that sort of stuff. When I commute to work, I want a snack that keeps me occupied so I don't get bored. That could be that milkshake example that we spoke about earlier. When I learn the guitar, I want to master it quick so I can impress my friends. So when I learn the guitar is the situation. I want to master it quick, that's the motivation, so I can impress my friends, that's the expected outcome. Now, that might not be true. It might be so I can join a band. It might be so I can keep myself occupied on an evening. I don't know what it is. These are just made up, of course, but hopefully this gives you a framework for you to use for your customers. And the last one here, when I look for investors, I want to ensure a cultural fit so I can still run my business my way. Now, if that's really important, if that's the job that the business owner is trying to get done, and you as a private equity or venture capitalist firm know that, that enables you to make your pitch to that business so much more compelling. Because yes, the business owner wants investment, and yes, they want cash flow, and they want cash reserves so they can make acquisitions or do whatever it is they want to do. But ultimately, to some business owners, that might be imperative that they're not micromanaged. They're allowed to run it their way. There's got to be that good cultural fit. And if you know that's a motivating factor in the job the business owner wants to get done, you can major on that in your pitch, in your presentations, in your collateral. That makes you far more appealing and compelling to those business owners. So as you can see, this works for both the B2B and B2C environments. There's no difference. We ultimately deal with buyers and researchers just the same. So I've given you a couple of B2B examples, and I've given you a couple of B2C examples, I've given you a couple of technology ones there, so you can really kind of see how this works, right? So hopefully that makes sense. For the guitar one, that's relatively straightforward. If you run a guitar ad saying, you know, guitar lessons from €20 per hour available next day or whatever, that's okay. But if you talk to your audience based on what you know about them, learn a 5-song set list in less than a week to impress your friends, that's far more compelling and magnetic to the user that has that job to be done. And ultimately, you can test these as well, right? You don't have to be married to these. If you can't observe, or you can't poll or survey and really get underneath the skin of your consumers to really understand what's so important, that's okay. What you can do is you can test these. You can take your best assumptions for your audience and test those messages in an environment that allows you to determine the efficacy of those propositions. So it could be impress your friends. It could be join a band. It could be occupy your free time. It could be express your creative whatever. There's all sorts of things that you can test there. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our hour. If you have any questions, now's the time to post them. I'm going to run through some resources and close this session off. If you've got any questions, ask them now in either the Q&A box or the chat box, and I'll happily answer as many of those questions as I can before our time is up. So I've got some resources for you. So there's a couple of books. There's the Innovator's Dilemma and the Innovator's Solution. Both of those are by an author called Clayton Christensen, and he's actually speaks authoritatively around the milkshake example. You'll find the milkshake examples in there. There's a linking jobs to be done to strategy. There's a really good article on LinkedIn that I'd encourage you to read. It's not a long read at all. It's probably about a 5-minute read. And it talks about how you link that jobs to be done framework directly to your strategy to make it that little bit more pragmatic in your day-to-day roles and environment. And there's a video there about putting jobs to be done into practice. So once you've understood the philosophy of the framework and you've created that framework for yourself, there's a really good video there that helps you put that into practice and drive meaningful change through your enterprise or agency or consultancy practice or business or whatever it is. So that's it. That's all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions for me? Is there anything that you want to know? If there's anything that I've not covered off, like I say, you will get a copy of that presentation, and you will also get the links in there as well if you want to follow up on some of those resources. Anybody got any questions for me before we close off today's session? You've all been very quiet. I'll give you a few seconds because I appreciate some of you may still be typing or whatever. Okay, hang on a sec. Okay, so Raghev's asking, when a new product is innovated, it was not there before, what would be the thinking like? Okay, so how would we be thinking about that? Right. If you've got a brand new product to market, so nothing like it before, completely different frame, right? This is the instance that we were talking about with Henry Ford, right? Whereas if you'd asked your audience what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Ask your audience what they want, of course, because they may be already thinking along the same lines of you, absolutely. But you also need to consider, actually, we've got a better way of doing it. They just haven't thought of that yet. So your proposition has to major heavily on the demonstration of the benefits, right? Has to major on that. If they don't understand that demonstration of the benefits, then they simply won't get it. Apple summed it up perfectly in a few words when they launched the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? You have to be able to demonstrate the benefit to the users. Hopefully that gives you a good answer to that one. I've got a few comments in the chat. Oh, you're more than welcome, guys. There's some lovely comments there. Thank you really very much for that. That's lovely. I'm glad you've enjoyed the session today. Paresh is asking, the statements about consumers, they don't know what they want. They could also be applied to B2B customers and users, correct? That is absolutely correct, Paresh. Absolutely it is. In fact, I find the more complex the sale or the more complex the requirement, I think that's increasingly so. So if you have long, drawn-out sales cycles of 18 months or so, which you can do in some highly technical categories, of course, then yes, this applies equally. You know, what is the job they're trying to get done is so important. And being able to help them understand that is incredibly important as well. How do you measure the value of using jobs to be done? And that's a great question. It's one that one that I don't often get, actually. The value of the jobs to be done framework isn't measured in isolation. It's measured comparatively with how you go about your normal business practices. So, for example, take the milkshake. They'd approached the problem and they'd tried a couple of different things, and the measurement for that was the sales of those milkshakes. By deploying the jobs to be done framework and jobs to be done thinking, the sole metric of it was, has it shifted the needle in sales of the milkshake? So your measurement of the effectiveness of the platform, of the program and the framework is based on your objective outcome. What did you go into it looking to achieve? Did it help you achieve that? There's no separate measurement for this framework at all, so it becomes really nice, simple, and straightforward for you to implement. So Peter's asking, interested in knowing how this might apply to home ownership. I'm not really too sure what you're referring to there, Peter. Are you talking about from the perspective of the mortgage company, trying to reach out to audiences about their particular mortgage product? Is that what you're referring to? Or the builders? Let me know. Interested in knowing how this might apply to home ownership, Peter. Yeah, if you let me know a little bit more, I'll hopefully answer that one. Any tips on segmentation once you've identified your target audience? Yes, your audience can be segmented in a number of different ways. And ultimately, without knowing loads and loads about your business, it'd be impossible for me to tell you which one, but I can give you some ideas. So you can segment your audience based on lifetime value, for example. So you segment them based on how much they're worth to you over their lifetime. You could segment them based on their behaviors or their inferred preferences from things like Google Analytics and website behavior and that sort of thing. You can segment them based on the types of product they buy, the industry they work in. You can segment them by age, gender, geography. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can segment them. Without knowing the specifics, it's impossible for me to suggest one. Hopefully that's given you a few ideas. Peter, from a builder's perspective, okay, so you were asking, Peter, just to be clear, interested in knowing how this might apply to home ownership from a builder's perspective. Okay, so the builder, of course, is building the homes, and the builder wants to sell those homes to general public. Think about what it is the user is absolutely trying to get done. What is the job they want to do? It's not buy a house, right? That's the thing, that's the transaction. That's not what they want. They want security for their family. They want their kids to grow up in a better environment and estate or whatever than they did. They want the best schools. They want an easy commute. What is it that the user really wants? What is it a user is particularly attracted to you and your properties over those of your competitors? Think about those. Really get under the skin of what it is they're buying that property for. Is it because of the curb appeal? They want to show off to their friends. There's a whole bunch of reasons. And I think the deeper we can get to that, rather than concentrating on the functional square footage, which most builders do, and they talk about how each room is well appointed. Yeah, all of those things are important. I'm not saying leave them at the door. What I'm saying is really try and understand the emotional reasons and the job it is that the buyer's trying to get done when they buy one of your properties. You're more than welcome for the session, guys. Thank you very much for those comments. How does the jobs to be done framework compare or complement design thinking? It works alongside design thinking. It's definitely not in contradiction, maybe a slightly different way of looking at it. David saying formulate each job into a statement. That's absolutely right. So what you would do is you'd formulate each job the customer wants to get done into one of these statements. Now, you may have certain customers that have multiple statements. Of course, it depends on what category or sector that you're in. But again, it's about trying to understand all of the reasons why people buy from you. What job is it they're trying to get done, and formulate those into the statement. Peter, it would be difficult to observe how people go about buying a home because at the time it takes part online, part offline, and a very complex decision. You are absolutely right, Peter. The observation is quite critical there. So maybe you can do some sort of survey, sorry, maybe you can do some sort of video analytics on the website to understand what content people really want to spend time with, what content they skip over, what seems to motivate them the most. When you're doing viewings or you have your show homes and that sort of thing, you could do some sort of questionnaires there as part of the application process or part of the requesting more information process. And you can frame those questions based around your observations up to that point, or maybe some of your assumptions if it's difficult to observe initially, and find what pulls the hardest, what resonates most with your users. David, please take it briefly again. So you want me to explain the jobs to be done statements? Again, that's no problem at all. So you've got a customer or a prospect, and or look at it from your end user's perspective, right? Let's say you're the one selling the iPod, right? We'll go with the iPod. You own the iPod, right? And a great jobs to be done statement for you would be, when I travel, I want to take a large selection of music so I can be entertained. So you are writing through the eyes of your consumer, not the business. You write through the eyes of the consumer. So what is it the consumer wants to get done when they engage with you? What job is it they want to get done? Think of that. Then think about how you can answer that jobs to be done statement in the most clear, compelling, and persuasive way you know how. So when Apple did it with the iPod, their jobs to be done statement could have been, when I travel, I want to take a large selection of music so I can be entertained. Their answer to that jobs to be done statement was 1,000 songs in your pocket, among other things, of course, but that was their clear value prop at the time. Hopefully that answers it for you. David. Okay, brilliant. I don't think I've missed any questions. I've got a lot of thanks for the session, so you guys are more than welcome. Thank you very much for being present and participating. As always, you guys make my job super easy. I try and bring a certain amount of energy and excitement to these sessions because I genuinely love doing these sessions for you guys. I know you're on a really exciting course that can be quite challenging. I know I've led these sessions in this course in the past, but hopefully you're finding it really rewarding as well. And, congratulations for being here and making it this far through the course and enjoying it and engaging with that program. And of course, I wish you the very best of luck in the rest of your course as well. So from me, for now, thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for participating. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.